State, are you ready to begin with opening statements?
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. What did I do, Joe? Those are the last words of Edward Lee Tudor as he was on his knees on his front lawn, hands up, begging for his life, when this defendant, Qiu Ke, shot him twice in the body so that he could get a better shot at the back of his head, and then walked around and shot him in the back of the head, killing him. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for all the attention that you've already paid. If you didn't believe me yesterday that this process was going to be boring and long, I'm sure that you believe me now. But we all do appreciate the attention you paid thus far and the attention that we expect you're going to pay during the course of the trial. So opening statement is my opportunity to give you guys a preview of what we expect the evidence that you'll hear from the witness stand is going to show. And we expect that the evidence is going to show that Edward Lee Tudor lived at 3519 Richboro Drive, which is in Holiday. And he lived there for a number of years. He moved in, and over the course of the many years that he lived there, he had some roommates, one of which was a man named Brian Smith, actually lived almost the entire time with him there up until about 5 days before Mr. Lee was killed on January 23rd, 2018. He also had a roommate during part of that time by the name of Jennifer Nichols. And Jennifer Nichols had moved out some 6 months, 7 months, 8 months earlier. Now, over the course of the time Mr. Tudor lived there, he was gradually renovating the house. It's an old Holiday house. He was gradually changing things, doing the bathroom, changing the floors. He did that slowly. There was also a great part of that time that they didn't have air conditioning in the house, which, as everybody knows, in Florida, that's a terrible situation to be in. So a lot of times it was very common for them to have all the windows open so they get a cross breeze in, so the place would be livable. Mr. Tudor also had a number of dogs, about 5 dogs, Chihuahuas, that it was not uncommon for him to be yelling at the dogs. Occasionally, profanity may fly at the dogs. And next door at 3527 Richboro Drive lived this defendant. And one thing you'll find out, these houses are very close together. Now, January 23rd, 2018, began like a normal day for Mr. Edward Lee Tudor. He woke up, a friend was meeting him at his residence, a woman by the name of Nikita Cox, and they were going to work on some schoolwork together. Mr. Tudor at this time was in some nursing classes, as was Ms. Cox. The two of them were going to meet up to work on some schoolwork. And that did in fact happen. Ms. Cox goes to 3519 Richboro Drive earlier in the morning and is there working with Mr. Tudor. Now, when Mr. Smith, Brian Smith, was living there with Mr. Tudor, Mr. Tudor's bedroom had been on the side of the house closest to this defendant's residence. By the time Ms. Cox was there, it looks like he had converted that into kind of a study. And he had a couple desks with computers on them. And the two of them were sitting there working on their schoolwork. And Mr. Tudor had no idea what was coming. Around 12:15 to 12:20, by now in the early afternoon, Mr. Tudor, shortly after he has a phone conversation with his mother, heads off to the other side of the house, which he now appears to be using as his bedroom. Ms. Cox sees him leave. It looks like he's going to do something with the dogs over that way. Mr. Tudor heads over to his bedroom, and as he's coming out of his bedroom, this defendant has let himself into Mr. Tudor's house by the front door. This defendant armed to the teeth. Mr. Tudor doesn't know what's going on, and this defendant pulls out a firearm, points it at Mr. Tudor, and shoots him. Mr. Tudor is standing there holding a dog, gets hit in the arm. Mr. Mr. Tudor is asking, what's wrong? What's the matter? What did I do, Joe? And you'll hear this defendant, a nickname that was used for him was Joseph. Mr. Tudor stumbles out and heads out to the front yard. He exits the house from the front door and is now in his front yard. This defendant, thinking that Miss Cox may have been Miss Nichols returning to the residence, had picked January 23rd, 2018, and he goes upstairs. There's a small bonus room situation that's been made into 2 rooms, I think, in a bathroom. He heads up the stairs looking for Miss Nichols, who is not there, encounters a locked door, uses his firearm to shoot the lock to gain entrance to this room, and there's nobody there. In the meantime, Mr. Tudor is outside on the lawn calling for help. And by calling, I mean yelling for help. He does not have his phone. But this defendant goes back down the stairs and re-engages with Mr. Tudor. The defendant chases Mr. Tudor around the side of the house, chases Mr. Tudor back to the front of the house, where Mr. Tudor gets on his knees. He has his hands up, saying, "Please, Joe, what did I do? What did I do?" This defendant saying, "You know what you did." Moving around him, wants to shoot him in the head, but can't bring himself to shoot him in the face. He tries, shoots him twice in the body, and Mr. Tudor goes down. And then this defendant moves around and shoots him once in the back of the head. The defendant then goes back into Mr. Tudor's residence, again, probably looking for Miss Nichols, who is not there, hasn't been living there for months, and goes into the room towards where Miss Cox is, sees Miss Cox, recognizes she's not Miss Nichols, heads out, goes back to his residence. While this is going on, in addition to Miss Cox being there, you'll hear there was a mail carrier by the name of Jacqueline Comprick, been on this route for a number of years, I think she's going to say close to 20 years, coming up a road that is perpendicular to Richboro Drive and actually faces directly where all this was happening. As she's driving up, she sees part of this development, and radios to her office, the letter carrier, to find out what to do. She's going to have to divert her route. Not something that she's used to doing, because normally she goes on her route and delivers the mail. Rain, shine, sleet, or snow. But she sees this developing, and she sees how this happens. She watches this defendant kill Mr. Tudor. But in the meantime, her office is contacting law enforcement, and Ms. Cox is on the phone with law enforcement. As this happens, Ms. Cox does not see what's going on, but she begins to hear this develop and has no idea what's going on, freaking out. She calls 911. And by this time, law enforcement is en route. Ms. Comprick pulls her mail vehicle over to a side street, not that far away, and law enforcement begins to arrive. And initially, Detective David Murphy, Deputy Croft, and Corporal Brian Long arrive approximately the same time. Detective Murphy's probably 20 seconds before the others. They all get there, and they don't know when they get there exactly what's going on. They know the basic shots are fired. They don't know yet what has happened to Mr. Tudor. But they get on scene. Their first thought is they need to make sure the threat, wherever the threat is, whatever the threat is neutralized. Where is the threat? They don't know. So they start fanning out, trying to figure out what's going on. Eventually, Ms. Cox comes out, and they make contact with her. They try and move her to safety. And Detective Murphy, in particular, is standing in a position on the front yard trying to keep an eye on everywhere while they're looking to find out what happened, where is the person that is shooting. As he's doing this defendant comes out of his front door, a little bit behind Detective Murphy, says, "I did it, I shot him. I'm the one you're looking for. Hands up." turns himself in. Edward Murphy turns around, begins to secure the defendant, gets him down on the ground. There, they pat him down. They find multiple magazines for firearms on his person and a holster that he used to carry the firearm. People go in and are checking this defendant's residence, make sure there's nobody in distress there, and there's nobody else in there. The defendant lived by himself. He's the only one who's there. They go in and they call it clearing. They clear Mr. Lee Tudor's residence, and again, nobody else is in there. They got Miss Cox out. Mr. Tudor is dead on the lawn, and law enforcement begins to investigate. They investigate, and detectives come and they speak with the defendant, and he is very cooperative. He has no problem telling them exactly what happened and where the evidence is. He said, yeah, the firearm is right there by the front door. I left it by the front door. I have surveillance cameras. My surveillance video should have caught everything. Law enforcement go in. Sure enough, the defendant's surveillance cameras caught the killing. He tells them Mr. Tudor has been making noise. There's been noise coming from that residence. And the defendant believes that Mr. Tudor has been doing this on purpose. That Mr. Tudor has been purposely making knocking sounds or other sounds in order to have a war with this defendant. That those sounds, and he believes that Mr. Tudor is evil and manipulative and had turned Jennifer Nichols against the defendant. And so he wanted to kill them both on this particular day. Law enforcement investigates. They find out the defendant had gone, earlier that day, the defendant had gone to get his will notarized. He goes and gets his will notarized by a woman named Sarah Leeper at a UPS store. His last will and testament. He then later goes to a pawn shop to try to get more ammunition. Make sure he's got enough to do the deed that he is planning to do. However, they don't have any for the firearm that he's trying to get for. He's got a 9mm and a .22. He comes back. The defendant goes, as I described. He goes in the front door. If it wasn't locked, he says if it had been locked, I was just going to come back later. Shoots Mr. Tudor, chases Mr. Tudor, and ultimately kills Mr. Tudor on the front lawn. He says his plan was then to come back to his residence and hang himself in his garage. He researched it, and he didn't think that hanging would be that painful. It'd take a while, but he figured he'd pass out quick. He has a rope set up in his garage. He gets there, he has a rope around his neck, and he decides he can't go through with it. By that time, law enforcement has been arriving, so that's when he decides, I'm going to go turn myself in. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is not all the evidence in the case. It is just a summary of the evidence of what we expect you to hear from witnesses. But at the conclusion of all the testimony and all of the evidence, we're going to ask you to find this defendant guilty of murder in the first degree for brutally killing Mr. Tudor on Mr. Tudor's front lawn on January 23rd, 2018. Thank you.
Thank you, State Defense. Do you wish to make an opening statement at this time?
Your Honor, we reserve our opening statement until after the state rests.
All right.